In terms of my research, I think the biggest surprise is the most basic surprise, which when we think about Gettysburg, I think most of us assume, is my loudness okay? Okay. We assume that it was always there the way it is now. And I think I was most profoundly impressed to see how dutifully and carefully it had been constructed over time. And yet, of course, that process, even if we point to Lincoln's Gettysburg Address and say that this place becomes different than any other location, even other battlefields, once that speech is given in 1863. Actually, when you begin going through the aftermath of the battle, in this community, in a place where people were immediately needing to live, there were terrible problems. So I changed my font, that's what it did. Sorry. I think you'll be able to use your imagination, hopefully see the text that I have up there available to you. The initial recovery from the battle, of course, began even before the battle was finished. And that went on with the U.S. Sanitary Commission that would then stay in place and help with the running of the hospitals and the convalescence that went on at this site. But initially, many of the burials, of course, were done on the battlefield. And that's what you see pictured. I don't think I can do this anymore. But up here, and then over here, I have a diagram of how they were supposed to be buried. But that burial process that went on the battlefield was meant to be a temporary holding place. And the graves were often not very deep. And so it was what Lincoln basically spoke for, the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery in November 1863, that allowed us to begin to see that this place was never going to go back. It was never going to go back to what it was before. It was only going to move forward and become something else yet to be defined. At this time, the nature of this place was also part of the recovery. In the last image that I had up there, you saw the state of many of the trees, the ground torn up, and then, of course, the open graves and the fact that this place had become sacred in a way because of the burials on the field that most other places, even battlefields, would ever experience. From recovery, you move almost immediately into a period that I call definition. And in that period, I think the most interesting discovery was the mustachioed guy there. That is John Badger Batchelder. And as you see from the description here, he is integral in a lot of different ways to the transition of this place from knowing that it's not going to go back to what it was before the battle to actually becoming what it was going to become. It is Batchelder, whose background was in painting and drawing, who looks at the landscape of the place and begins to record the narrative with those places as essential to the battle storyline. It is Batchelder, I would argue, that is behind the fact that many of us who don't know the names of any of the natural features around our own homes, know Devil's Den, Little Round Top, Big Round Top, Seminary Ridge, Cemetery Hill, and so many others. He organizes this both because it's how he sees the place, how he learns of the action, but also because he also is the first one to really get involved with interviewing veterans. And as they try to form the narrative, again, coming into this project, I expected everyone just knew what had happened, what had transpired. But it's people like Batchelder in the 1860s, and for a few decades beyond that, who gather the story. And so in order to organize those tales that are being told to them, the places become absolutely essential to locating action and describing events. In terms of preservation, the battlefield never goes back from this. those become the identifying points for the landscape that will evolve, and it is Batchelder's first maps that will really then guide the construction and purchase of the ground that will become the Gettysburg National Military Park. At this point, though, he is operating with the GBMA. This organization, the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association, is a private organization. And they are committed, for business reasons as well as memorial reasons, to making this place become a battlefield park unlike any that had been seen in the world up to this point. Batchelder, as he defines this, I'm afraid of doing something. Postpone? No, you can. As Batchelder did his work, as the GBMA did their work to purchase land, you then had business people step in and begin to say that this place was attracting visitors immediately. And therefore, there was a buck to be made, there was development to happen. And so what I refer to as the era of genteel tourism begins to unfold, some of it more genteel than others. And you have the construction by private means of the first tower that you see up at the top there, and other towers throughout. And this is a period where you will see visitation increase, but the development is guided by private individuals. And the GBMA is fighting very vigorously to have the place have a certain decorum. And much of the minutes that were gathered by their meetings from the GBMA dealt with trying to rein in the antics of people at the beer park on top of Little Round Top and other places that had been established by landowners. And this is an interesting phase in preservation. And the idea of the sacred is very different than we would think of today. It is also Batchelder who, again involved with the genteel preservation, seeks to use the landscape as a form of reconciliation and argues for the copse to be made into the first commemorative landscape, and it is done so. It goes on at different phases, 1890s to 1901, but that is when this iron fence is installed. And it is the first landscape feature to be dealt with in this fashion. And it's interesting just because of that, but in particular it's interesting because the reason for doing it was because as he was interviewing veterans, he was finding a real reluctance on the Confederate part to participate with his interviews. And so this was kind of an olive branch in the form of the commemorative copse that would hopefully convey to them that this was a memorial for them. As he talked to the few Confederate soldiers who would speak with him, they talked about how during the Pickett Pettigrew Charge, this was their goal. They were going for those trees. And this is why he then argues that that landscape feature should be set aside.